Get in the bed. That's the order the Mafia boss gave as he slid a loaded gun under his pillow. He's dripping blood from a knife wound. His enemies are closing in, and there's a traitor inside his own mansion. The only person in the world he trusts right now, the terrified waitress he blackmailed into a fake engagement just hours ago. And now she has to sleep beside a killer.
The sharp, cracking echo of the strike split the heavy air of the obsidian, instantly silencing the soft music bleeding from the speakers. It was a flawless portrait of unchecked power colliding with helpless innocence. In the center of New York's most exclusive dining room, a trembling waitress stood frozen, the brutal red bloom of a handprint spreading across her pale cheek. Above her towered Vanessa Thorne, a woman whose immense wealth had long ago suffocated her human empathy. But the terrified eyes of the room were locked on Dante Moretti, a man known to bury his rivals in cold, wet concrete. You and I both know the suffocating tension that fills a room when a violent storm is about to break. But when the apex predator finally rose from his velvet chair, he did not reach for his weapon. Let us step back for just a moment and look at the fragile girl caught in this tragedy. Evelyn Vance nervously adjusted the stiff, suffocating collar of her uniform, her delicate frame practically vibrating with exhaustion. It was only 7:45 p.m., but her spirit was already running on empty. Beside her, Marcus, the floor manager, was sweating right through his expensive suit, his voice a frantic hiss as he delivered a terrifying warning about Table 4. The Moretti family had arrived. It is a harsh truth of life that survival often means learning exactly what to fear. Evelyn felt her stomach completely drop, a cold wave of pure dread rushing through her veins. In this dark, unforgiving metropolis, you didn't need to watch the evening news to understand the shadow that Dante Moretti cast over the city. The syndicate operated like a shadow across the city, a quiet, deadly pulse in the dark, with Dante serving as the lethal spark. Evelyn forced herself to swallow her rising panic. She had no choice. Her little brother Leo was scheduled for a life-saving surgery in exactly 1 week. Sometimes the deepest cuts we endure are the ones we take to keep our loved ones breathing. Gripping a silver tray holding 3 crystal glasses and imported water, she completely detached her mind from the terrifying reality of the room. She became a ghost, gliding past tables filled with powerful politicians and famous actors. Her breathing only hitched when she finally stepped into the cold, heavy darkness surrounding Table 4, her body instinctively bracing for the danger lurking just ahead. 3 massive men in dark suits stood like stone pillars, forming an impenetrable wall of muscle and violence. At the very center of this gravity sat Dante. He was perhaps 32 years old, his sharp, haunting features far more striking than any blurred newspaper photograph could ever capture. Dressed in a charcoal suit caracal eyes. His dark eyes scanned the elegant dining room with the terrifying, bored calm of a caged wolf. Beside him lounged Vanessa Thorne, a ruthless heiress, draped in a weaponized slice of crimson silk. She aggressively tapped at the screen of her mobile phone, completely isolating herself from the living, breathing humans around her. It was a cold, impenetrable shield of arrogance that dared anyone to step too close to her carefully curated throne. Evelyn stepped forward, bowing her head in a desperate attempt to appear small as she gently offered the expensive beverages. Dante refused to even look at her, a silent, crushing display of absolute power as he simply tapped one finger against the table. Vanessa, however, went straight on the attack, her voice dripping with venom as she mocked how long the drinks had taken. Evelyn forced a painfully polite smile, quietly apologizing while setting the crystal down. Without warning, Vanessa snapped at her to freeze, pointing a perfectly manicured nail at a completely imaginary smudge on the glass. When Evelyn softly swore the crystal was spotless, Vanessa absolutely exploded. Her shrill voice echoed off the high ceilings, shattering the quiet dignity of the entire restaurant. Slipping instantly into pure survival mode, Evelyn frantically apologized again and reached forward to remove the offending glass. But Vanessa violently swatted her hand away, demanding she pour the water while loudly mocking Dante for his cold silence. As Evelyn's trembling fingers tilted the heavy glass pitcher, Vanessa suddenly jerked her elbow backward, intentionally slamming it into the poor girl's fragile wrist. The crystal slipped from her grip. You and I know that in the face of true disaster, time seems to stretch into an agonizing crawl. The icy vintage water completely missed Dante, splashing entirely down the front of Vanessa's expensive crimson dress. For a single terrifying second, all the air was sucked out of the room, leaving behind a heavy, suffocating silence. A horrific, jagged shriek ripped from Vanessa's throat, sounding entirely stripped of anything human. Her beautiful features twisted into a dark, ugly mask of pure rage. To her yacht, she leaped, hurling the most degrading, filthy insults at the terrified waitress. Before Evelyn could even open her mouth to beg for forgiveness, the blow landed. It was a vicious backhand, weighted by a massive diamond ring that cracked sickeningly against Evelyn's delicate cheekbone. The sheer force of the brutal impact swept the young girl completely off her feet. She crashed hard against the unforgiving marble floor, her silver tray clattering into the silence like a falling sword. The soft jazz music above was instantly cut, leaving the stunned, wealthy crowd staring in absolute horror. A blinding, white-hot agony exploded across the left side of Evelyn's face, followed immediately by the warm, metallic taste of fresh blood flooding her mouth. Hot tears spilled out of her eyes, driven entirely by the blinding physical shock rather than any emotional defeat. Vanessa stood over her trembling body like an angry god, screaming promises to destroy the girl's entire life. Marcus, the restaurant manager, rushed over, his face drained of all color. In a pathetic attempt to appease the wealthy monsters in his dining room, he immediately screamed that Evelyn was fired. As the dizzy, sobbing girl pushed herself up on one elbow to plead her innocence, Vanessa viciously raised her jeweled hand, preparing to deliver a second devastating blow to the fallen girl. Vanessa hissed that her perfect evening had been ruined, her arms swinging back to deliver the final punishment. On the floor, Evelyn squeezed her eyes shut, pulling her shoulders tight as she waited for the brutal impact. But the strike never came. A deep, impossibly calm voice sliced through the chaos, carrying a terrifying weight that instantly froze the air. You and I have probably learned by now that true, deadly power never actually needs to raise its voice. Dante had finally moved. His large hand was clamped around Vanessa's raised wrist, stopping the deadly diamond just an inch from Evelyn's bleeding cheek. His grip looked casual, but the heiress was completely paralyzed by the pressure. Ignoring her frantic demands to be released, the Dark Prince slowly lowered his gaze. For the very first time all evening, the feared underworld king actually looked at the broken girl at his feet. His dark eyes dragged over Evelyn with a cold, terrifying precision, noting her violently shaking shoulders and the steady trail of crimson leaking from her torn cheek. A tiny, almost sculptable shift rippled across Dante's sculpted face. It was not kindness. It was not human pity. It was a dark, sudden possessiveness that made the air feel dangerously thin. The entire restaurant held its collective breath. To see violence here was rare, but to see a Moretti step in to stop it was a terrible omen. Without ever breaking his intense stare on the bleeding waitress, Dante simply let go of Vanessa's wrist, dropping her arm as if discarding a piece of useless garbage. He delivered a single whispered command to his furious companion. his voice so dangerously soft, yet laced with such absolute authority that the words felt like poison. The psychological shift was violent and instant. Vanessa crumbled back into her velvet chair, her face burning with a humiliated, furious red flush. Dante then moved. He stepped around the table with the smooth, silent grace of a tiger circling wounded prey, finally coming to a halt directly in front of Evelyn. Marcus, the cowardly manager, was practically shaking out of his shoes, babbling frantic apologies and promising to throw the girl into the street. Dante slowly turned his terrifying gaze toward the sweating man, his voice like freezing rain as he asked if Marcus had actually witnessed any such attack. The pathetic manager choked on his own words, completely breaking under the crushing weight of Dante's stare. With chilling calm, Dante rewrote the history of the room, stating clearly that he had only seen a minor accident, followed by an unprovoked brutal assault. The absolute fearlessness of his lie sent a cold shudder through everyone listening. Then, Dante slowly reached down, offering his massive to the bleeding girl on the floor. A home in a tragic bond is born. This is exactly where a tragic bond is born. Evelyn stared at his offered palm, every alarm bell in her mind screaming that this was a deadly trap. Yet, looking up, she saw no anger in his beautiful golden-flecked eyes, only a deep, terrifying fascination. Shivering, she surrendered her tiny hand to his. Evelyn forced herself to hold his gaze as he pulled her effortlessly to her feet. Up close, his eyes were a mesmerizing collision of stormy gray and liquid gold. Stepping intimately close, Dante lifted his thumb, gently tilting her bruised chin upward. The sudden warmth of his skin against hers made Evelyn gasp, her chest heaving, as he quietly studied the blood running down her pale neck. When he softly pointed out her injury, her tragic instinct was to apologize again and desperately try to clean the shattered glass. But his voice cracked like a whip, ordering her to leave the mess exactly where it was. Slowly, the Dark King turned his massive shoulders back toward Vanessa, whose eyes were practically burning holes into his chest, demanding to know what he was doing. The harsh light catches Vanessa recoiling, disgusted that Dante would touch a mere worker. Dante completely ignores her. The camera focuses on his steady hands as he presses a clean cloth against Evelyn's bleeding skin. "Hold it," he orders. Evelyn's chest heaves. Her heart thumps like a trapped bird as she begs to keep her job. Dante does not even look at her, turning his cold stare to a waiter to demand the check. Vanessa shoots out of her chair, complaining bitterly about the ruined evening, but Dante just shuts her down. The date is over. Enraged, Vanessa pivots and spits her venom directly at bleeding Evelyn. It really reminds you of a hard truth we all have to face. The people wrapped in the most arrogant pride are always the quickest to punish the broken. Let us open the scene on Dante Moretti. You and I are going to examine a masterpiece of psychological ruin. Notice the ambient lighting of the restaurant, cold and unforgiving. Vanessa screams about her ruined designer dress, blind to the tragedy she is setting in motion. It is a harsh truth of life. Arrogance always blinds us to our own downfall. She fails to see the microscopic tightening of Dante's jaw. He steps into her space, a towering monolith of shadow. His voice drops to a terrifying quiet, refusing to sit with someone who lacks the discipline to treat the vulnerable with respect. This is no rescue mission. It is a pure display of absolute power. Vanessa threatens to call her father, but Dante does not flinch. Megalomaniacs never fear the fire, for they are the ones who strike the match. The scene shifts as Dante turns his broad back on the shrieking woman, a flawless execution of social dismissal. Watch the shadows pool around his tailored shoulders. He locks his predatory gaze onto Marcus, the manager sweating under the heavy chandelier. Marcus stammers, about firing the girl missing a vital lesson. Fear is a heavy chain that only empowers the ruthless. Dante demands the fragile creature's name, Evelyn Vance. He repeats it, letting the syllables drag across the silence like a dark vow. The ultimatum falls like a guillotine. If she is not employed by dawn, he will buy the building, burn it to ash, and pave over the memory. Marcus crumbles instantly. In the corner, her eyes are dark pools of terror, fingers gripping a ruined, blood-soaked cloth. "Get your coat," he commands, his baritone voice slicing through the heavy air. He dictates her immediate future. Later her shift is over, her bleeding cheek requires stitches, and the subway is out of the question. Her survival instincts scream. She whispers that she cannot go with him, reading the lethal danger in his posture. A profound lesson rests here. Our intuition is often our only true protector in a world of wolves. Dante offers a slow, agonizingly sharp smile, a micro-expression of pure hunting amusement. He steps closer, trapping her in the scent of cedar and dark intentions. He lowers his voice to an intimate hum, asking if she prefers the cruelty of her manager and a violent woman, or the dark, unknown with him. It is a beautifully tragic execution of the classic isolation trap. Evelyn's desperate eyes dart across the room. Vanessa is a blur of raw hostility, while Marcus radiates pure cowardice. You and I have all stood at these terrible crossroads, learning that desperation often forces us into the arms of our own destruction. She looks at Dante, an apex predator, offering a tragic of temporary shelter. She breathes a tragic whispered surrender. Dante extends his arm. As her trembling fingers rest against his fine wool suit, the tragedy is sealed. They walk out, together, the collective shock of the room burning into her spine. She entered this night as an invisible ghost, and leaves tethered to a monster. As the cool street air hits her flushed face, and the black limousine door swings open, she remains utterly unaware that her true descent has just begun. The heavy door of the luxury vehicle shuts with a suffocating thud, severing them from the chaotic noise of the city. Dante Moretti does not assist humans, he consumes them. "Tell me about the man you are working so hard to save," he murmurs from the shadows. Her blood turns to jagged ice. It is a brutal reminder that secrets are the currency of the powerless, always stolen by the powerful. She has never spoken that sacred name aloud in his presence. The cabin is clinically perfect, completely isolated from the world outside. It smells faintly of expensive Italian leather and cold, unforgiving steel. The psychological cage has been locked. The predator has dragged his fragile prey into the absolute dark, and the oxygen is already beginning to slowly, quietly run out. Outside, the neon city lights bleed into formless smears against the heavy-tinted glass. Evelyn presses her spine against the opposite door, desperate for the illusion of distance. In the agonizing quiet, you can almost hear the frantic drumming of her terrified heart. "Tell me about Leo." The demand hangs in the cold air, tearing at her soul far more violently than the physical slap she endured. It reveals a devastating truth. Our deepest loves are always our greatest vulnerabilities. Leo is her frail 16-year-old boy battling leukemia. He is the sole reason she works until her feet literally bleed, burying her sorrow beneath a stained apron. To have this towering dark force invade her single, sacred reason for living is a psychological violation of the absolute highest order. How? The word fractures as it escapes her trembling lips. She desperately tries to summon the hollow bravery used to survive the midnight shifts. Dante does not answer right away. Watch the cruel elegance of his delay. He slowly reaches for a crystal decanter. The amber liquid pouring gracefully in the dim light, he drinks, intentionally offering her nothing. He explains it is his business to know who serves his meals, especially a girl shaking so violently she can barely hold a tray. Evelyn flushes with profound shame. She stammers that the pressure of the work simply makes her anxious. But life teaches us an unforgiving lesson. When you are locked in the dark with a true demon, your desperate excuses are nothing more than shields made of thin paper, ready to be burned to ash. No, he corrects her, his tone dropping to a devastating caress. In the muted shadows, his eyes are utterly devoid of a soul. He notes that Marcus was nervous, but her scent is thick with the metallic tang of pure desperation. The glass hits the console with an echoing clink. The true horror washes over her delicate features as she realizes this was never a coincidence. We must remember a terrifying reality. We are never truly invisible, especially to the monsters dwelling in the shadows. Dante shifts smoothly, crossing a tailored leg. He confesses to hunting her for 3 agonizing weeks. He recites her slow decay like dark poetry. The bruised shadows under her eyes, her dropping weight, the frantic way she checks her broken screen. He has memorized every ounce of her suffering. Her hand crushes the cracked phone in her pocket, her only lifeline to the boy. Waitress. Her crippling, mutating, you are airing terror mutating into a tragic flare of defensive rage. But a harsh truth remains. Anger is a completely useless weapon when you lack the power to wield it. Dante sits like a statue of unbothered stone. He softly remarks that personal rights are merely comforting fairy tales told to the weak. Then he unleashes the devastating dossier. Evelyn Vance, 24. Guardian to a dying 16-year-old. Rotting in a Queens apartment, drowning beneath $80s and dollars of inescapable medical debt. He drops each clinical, horrifying fact into the quiet air like a judge delivering a death sentence. Her entire tragic existence is completely laid bare. Watch this carefully with me. You and I are witnessing the absolute surgical destruction of a human soul. Her reality is shattered. Hot, bitter tears spill over her eyelashes, burning the open wound on her cheek. "What do you want from me?" she sobs, pleading to know if her misery is just a game for a bored God. It reminds us that true control is rarely violent. It is the quiet, terrifying theft of a person's agency. Dante's large hand slips inside his tailored jacket. Evelyn recoils, her traumatized body bracing for a blade. Instead, he produces a pristine silk square. He leans forward, his heavy body heat swallowing her trembling frame. But he does not hand the fabric to her. To surrender the silk would be to surrender his dominance, and the devil never relinquishes his throne. With agonizing precision, he presses the silk to her wet skin, tracing the edge of her bleeding wound. This contact is a masterpiece of dark psychology, intensely possessive, yet paralyzingly gentle. The deepest tragedy in life is learning that the most dangerous monsters do not bite. They soothe your wounds until you forget how to run. He whispers that his former bride was a tedious child, but Evelyn is completely different. "Why am I relevant?" She gasps into the dark. His voice drops, a frequency that vibrates directly through her bones. He confesses a hatred for wasted potential, refusing to watch a precious asset break under a deadly burden. Just as she begins to drown in his twisted salvation, he withdraws his warmth. The car stops. "We are here," he announces, shattering the quiet and throwing her spinning mind back into chaos. The camera pulls back as the heavy limousine glides into a private subterranean garage. Harsh, aggressive, fluorescent lights flood the interior, shattering the dark intimacy of the cabin and shocking Evelyn's tired system. She blinks against the glare, reeling from a sudden mental whiplash. Dante's voice cuts through the quiet, smooth, casual, yet carrying the weight of a decree. He names Dr. Eris, the city's finest plastic surgeon. She stammers, Insisting the scratch needs only a cheap bandage, Dante dismisses her with freezing precision. She pours his champagne, he explains, making her appearance an extension of his own pristine image. True power never raises its voice. It simply reshapes the world to its liking. The driver opens the door. Watch the micro-expressions here. Dante extends his hand toward her. It is not an offer of comfort, but a silent, inescapable directive. The exact moment her trembling fingers brush his palm, the trap clicks shut. A sickening wave washes over her as she realizes she has traded the familiar weight of poverty for a beautiful, terrifying cage. We often reach for the hand that pulls us from the flood, ignoring the predator attached to it. The camera follows them into a sprawling private clinic. It feels like a luxury hotel lobby, carrying only a phantom trace of antiseptic. No wailing children, no plastic chairs, just polished marble and hushed wealth. As Dante strides through the wide glass doors, the very air pressure shifts, submitting entirely to his gravity. You and I are going to watch this scene unfold together. Notice how true power distorts gravity. Two reception nurses snap to attention, their spines stiffening on pure instinct. Dr. Aris scrambles from his office, his immaculate suit failing to hide the raw primal terror leaking from its pores. He breathlessly checks his benefactor. Terrified Dante himself is bleeding. Not me, Dante purrs. He presses a heavy hand against the small of Evelyn's back. Through the cheap polyester of her uniform, his heat feels like a brand. He smoothly mentions her unfortunate run-in with some jewelry, commanding the doctor to erase the damage. Without a word of protest, she is swept into an examination suite larger and more pristine than her entire rotting apartment in Queens. The camera lingers in a room paneled in rich mahogany, somehow both sterile and deeply opulent. For 20 agonizing minutes, Evelyn sits rigid on a plush table. The physician handles her as if she were spun glass, cleaning the cut with surgical grace, whispering frantic apologies every time her shoulders tense. "You smoothed glue." A seamless medical glue over her skin. But the true tension radiates from the corner of the room. Dante stands completely still. He just watches. This is the classic behavioral marker of a megalomaniac narcissist. He studies the tremor in her hands, absorbing her rising panic. People fear the anger of dangerous men, but it is their silence you must truly dread. His quietness crushes the air from the room, a deliberate weight meant to bind her entirely to him. Let the lens focus on this brutal psychological dance. The doctor presses a silver tube of cream into Evelyn's hands, promising the skin will be flawless in 7 days. He turns to Dante, asking if he should charge the standard account. Dante agrees, then executes a terrifyingly donation to the pediatric ward, placed entirely in Evelyn's name. She gasps, stumbling over her words, begging him not to do it. He acts as if she hasn't spoken at all, turning sharply for the door. Back in the velvet darkness of the limousine, her fear mutates into a crushing sense of debt. This is the bedrock of Stockholm Syndrome. When a captor buys your gratitude, they lock away your soul, making you thank them for the very cage they built for you. Consider the architecture of her ruin. He saved her job, shielded her in public, hired a master surgeon, and crowned her with charity. But for a girl bleeding out in the gutters of survival, kindness is always a lie. Every gentle gesture is a blade waiting to drop. In a fragile whisper, she gives the driver an address in Queens, a fractured neighborhood men like Dante only see in grim newspaper clippings. As the glittering Manhattan towers dissolve into decaying brick and shattered pavement, Dante does not flinch. He leans back, projecting the exact same apex predator calm he wears in a glass penthouse. When the heavy tires finally roll to a stop, the quiet hum of the engine is drowned out by Evelyn's burning, suffocating shame. She has brought a king into the mud. The setting reveals the brutal contrast of their worlds. It is a rotting 4-story brick building, its brown paint flaking off like dead skin, the front door hanging helplessly off its hinges. Men on the corner stop and stare as the sleek beast of a car purrs by the curb. Desperate to breathe real air, Evelyn whispers her thanks and grabs the door latch. Dante's voice is little more than a murmur, yet it freezes the blood in her veins. He turns his head. The sickly amber glow of a street lamp slices his face in half, bathing one side in sharp, predatory shadow. He says they need to discuss the future. Exhausted, her shoulders slumped in defeat, she asks if he means her future. Sometimes our greatest tragedies happen while we are busy looking the other way. The jaws are locked. She scrambles for a way out where none exists, pleading that she will work twice as hard, promising to be a ghost during his dinners. Dante shatters the glass with a single word. He speaks her first name, sliding past her defenses, and calmly states he does not care about the restaurant. In a voice as cold as winter stone, he recites the autopsy of her life. Leo needs surgery on Tuesday. The aggressive chemotherapy requires $25,000. Money she simply does not have. Her hands begin to shake wildly. She had been begging the universe for a miracle, but miracles rarely wear bespoke suits. The devil, however, always does. She stares at him, her voice reduced to a breathless whisper, completely paralyzed by the depth of his horrific knowledge. Now you and I will see exactly how the trap is sprung. Dante leans into the shadows and casually reveals that he owns the collection agency holding her brother's medical debt. He bought her life that morning. A violent wave of nausea crashes into Evelyn's chest. He does not merely hold her bills. He has weaponized her deepest fears. Tears spill as she finally breaks, crying out that she has absolutely nothing of value to give him. Dante shifts closer, invading her fractured space. The dim street lights catch his eyes, turning them into cold, calculating diamonds. He whispers that she has exactly what he needs. She has anonymity. She has a crushing desperation. She is entirely powerless. And with a slow, deliberate motion, he slides a matte black card from his jacket. He forces the thick card into her shaking palm. There is no name, just 10 silver digits gleaming in the dark. He explains his motives with terrifying surgical detachment. His last companion, Vanessa, made a scene. She made him look weak, and weakness is the only sin he recognizes. He demands a replacement who understands the absolute necessity of obedience. Evelyn just stares at the heavy card, her brain failing under the impossible weight of his words. He sets the stage. A car will arrive at 9. They will draw up the contracts at his high-rise office. Then he drops the anchor, drowning her completely. He will cover every single cent of Leo's treatment. The most dangerous bargains are never made with threats, but with the exact salvation we have been praying for. The price is the complete erasure of her soul. For 1 year, she will be his property. She will wear the clothes he chooses, walk where he points, and obey without a breath of hesitation. Bile rising in her throat, she chokes out a question, asking if he wants a mistress. A dark, hollow laugh escapes Dante's chest. Mistresses are messy, he notes. No, she will be his future bride. Before she can process the horror, she is standing alone on the cracked concrete. The heavy limousine pulls away, its red taillights bleeding into the filthy smog of the city. Evelyn stays frozen in her cheap shoes. She grips the thick card so tightly the sharp edges bite into her flesh, drawing blood. The distant scrum of a police siren echoes, mocking the absolute destruction of the life she once knew. The street around her thumps with chaos. A passing truck rattles the shattered glass of the windows, but inside Evelyn's mind there is only a ringing, terrified silence. The word fiancé turns to bitter ash on her tongue. This is not a twisted romance. It is a hostile takeover of a human life. You and I have seen how apex predators operate, calculating the exact amount of force needed to snap a fragile neck. Dante looked at her just like that. Shivering, she pushes open the splintered door of her building. The cramped hallway chokes her with the smell of boiled cabbage and stale smoke. Under the sickly buzz of a dying bulb, she drags her leaden legs up 3 flights of stairs, her chest tightening with absolute dread over what she will find waiting in apartment 3B. She unlocks the door, and the sound hits her instantly. A wet, violent cough rattling through the thin walls. Evelyn drops her bag and bolts for the tiny second bedroom. The camera focuses on her single, devastating weakness. Leo. He is hunched over a cracked plastic bucket. He is 16, but the disease has hollowed him out until he looks like a frightened child. His skin is the color of old parchment, so horribly thin that every blue vein pulses visibly beneath the surface. The poison of chemotherapy took his hair, and now the sickness is chewing away his spirit. Gasping for a breath, he whispers that she is late. Evelyn forces her trembling lips into a bright, perfect smile. She hides, her shattered soul sitting gently on his bed, lying about a terrible dinner rush. The camera pushes in close on the boy. He presses her about the tip money, his large, sunken eyes wide, with a terror that belongs to a much older man. He feels the crushing weight of the eviction notices stacked on the counter, a psychological decay that is killing him faster than the cancer itself. Evelyn lies without missing a beat, swearing she made plenty of cash. We watch her gaze drift to the nightstand. An empty bottle of anti-nausea pills sits beside an unfilled prescription slip, a slip requiring $40 she simply does not have. Exhausted, Leo sinks back into the pillows, his breathing terrifyingly shallow. He whispers that the oncologist called this afternoon. You and I know this kind of quiet despair, don't we? The lesson is simple. Sometimes poverty is a louder death sentence than disease. The tragedy deepens as Leo murmurs about hearing their mother speaking to the doctor before she left. Evelyn instantly goes rigid. Their mother had fled 6 months ago, shattered by the relentless, suffocating pressure of a dying child. The boy is fading, his fevered mind blurring the lines between past abandonment and present doom. When Evelyn asks about the phone call, he delivers the final blow. His white blood cells are completely depleted. The hospital wants to move him to hospice. That single clinical word hangs in the stagnant air like an executioner's blade. Hospice means surrender. It means the end. Unable to hold back the flood, Evelyn flees to the absolute queue, to the narrow, suffocating kitchen. She's desperately trying to drown out the maximum, desperately trying to drown out the violent, ragged sounds of her own sobbing. $80,000. That is the exact mathematical price tag placed on a little boy's breathing. The camera angles down as she stares at the rotting kitchen counter, overwhelmed by final warnings and aggressive medical debts. Slowly, her trembling fingers uncurl. A heavy black card catches the sickly fluorescent light, its silver numbers gleaming like a trap. Dante Moretti is no savior. He is a predator who moves in the shadows, a man who views human lives as disposable currency. To call him is to sign away her soul. But then a wet, agonizing cough echoes from the bedroom, ripping through her hesitation. She accepts the tragic fall. Here is a truth you and I must face. When the people we love are dying, morality becomes a luxury we can no longer afford. At exactly 1 a.m, the heavy silence of the apartment is broken as she dials those silver numbers. Dante answers on the first ring, his voice devoid of any human warmth. He had been waiting in the dark, entirely certain she would break. Evelyn whispers her absolute surrender into the receiver. He offers no gloating, only the chilling satisfaction of a predator watching the cage door click shut. Stick with me here, because this is where the tragedy sets in stone. The most dangerous bargains are rarely born from greed, but from a blinding, desperate kind of love. He coldly orders her to pack a single bag, promising her brother will be secured in a private medical wing by noon. The transaction is complete. The psychological erasure of Evelyn Vance has officially begun. Let us step back and look at the framing of this scene. When the line went dead, Evelyn collapsed onto the peeling linoleum, pulling her trembling knees flush against her chest. She had just auctioned off her own life to the most ruthless monster in the city. Yet, the instinct to protect is an overwhelming force. She would have gladly let the devil drag her to hell if it meant her little brother could celebrate his 17th birthday. That is the tragic lesson of sacrifice. We willingly walk into the fire for the ones we cherish. By 9 in the morning, the bleak reality arrived. A massive, black armored vehicle idled at the curb. Silas, a heavily scarred enforcer who moved like a blunt instrument, threw her battered suitcase into the trunk. He gave her only 2 words: "Get in." The camera pans across the empty bedroom. Leo was already gone, spirited away at dawn by a private medical team paid for by Dante. Evelyn had held the fragile boy close, choking out a desperate lie about securing a lucrative job as a live-in assistant. The false falsehood burned like acid in her throat. But sometimes, the purest acts of love require the darkest deceptions to keep our fragile ones safe. The drive into the heart of Manhattan was steeped in a suffocating, clinical silence. Silas gripped the steering wheel with pure hostility, forcing every other car off the asphalt as if they were nothing but insects. Finally, they arrived at Moretti Tower, a terrifying monolith of black glass and steel, tearing into the bleeding gray sky like a jagged blade forged only to intimidate. The entire structure was designed as an impenetrable fortress, built to violently separate the predator from the prey. Silas marched her toward a hidden steel elevator, unlocking the doors with a swift retinal scan. The sheer speed of the ascent made her ears pop, a jarring physical reminder that she was leaving the human world behind. The doors slid apart, revealing a chilling penthouse sanctuary. Men who view themselves as gods always build high altars. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding dictatorial view of the crawling city below. The room was aggressively bare, sharp chrome, black leather, and freezing air conditioning that left Evelyn violently shivering in her cheap sweater. And there, sitting entirely motionless behind a solid obsidian desk, was Dante. Watch the deliberate staging of this power dynamic. Dante was deep into a phone call, firing off aggressive Italian, refusing to even acknowledge her presence. He simply raised one hand and pointed a single, commanding finger at an empty chair. "Sit." Evelyn collapsed into the leather, folding her shaking hands into her lap. This is how you crush a person's spirit. You make them feel as insignificant as dust on the floorboards. Terminating the call without a single glance of empathy, he slid a massive stack of legal documents across the black stone. A contract demanding she become his fiancée. He asked if she had a lawyer to reuse her terms, but the question was dripping with venom. It was a calculated flex. He knew she was utterly alone, completely trapped in his intricate web. The lighting shifts as he slowly stands, stepping around the massive desk to loom directly over her trembling frame. This physical shadowing is a primal form of intimidation. Evelyn lifted the heavy paper, nausea rolling through her stomach as she read the sterile academic terms of her own slavery. She was to flawlessly portray his devoted fiancée. Absolute fidelity was mandatory. Every breath she took in the presence of another man required his explicit, documented approval. We often wonder how victims lose their minds. But here is the truth. Total control is easily hidden behind the ink formal when she read the catastrophic agreement. Catastrophic penalties for breaking the silence, the blood drained completely from her face. Dante merely waved off her sheer suffocating panic as a standard business clause. The temperature in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees as his voice lost all pretense of business. If she ever dared to betray him, if she so much as whispered to a reporter or looked at another man, with longing, legal ruin would be a gentle violence. The unspoken promise of extreme physical violence hung thick in the frozen air. When she choked back a sob and whispered that he owned her, he clinically corrected her. Only for 12 months. He then weaponized her own love, listing the staggering medical miracles he had just purchased for young Leo. The brutal surgeries, the endless chemotherapy. By securing her brother's fragile heartbeat, he brilliantly masked his pure tyranny as divine salvation. Leaning in close, smelling of sharp winter cedar, he delivered the final verdict. She was his property now. Let us pause and look closely at the twisted pathology unfolding before us. Finding a microscopic spark of buried defiance, Evelyn demanded to know why a billionaire would not simply hire an actress instead of kidnapping a broken waitress. His reaction was a terrifying portrait of absolute megalomania. He slowly reached out, his cold fingers violently gripping her chin, forcing her face into the harsh light as his thumb brushed over a fading purple bruise on her cheek. "Paid professionals only pretend," he whispered. He demanded her authentic, agonizing terror. He needed her profound, bleeding hatred and her total desperation to make the grand performance flawless. The life lesson here is dark but necessary. The worst monsters in this world do not want your affection. They only want to consume your fear. We have all seen how money can be weaponized, haven't we? To truly understand a man like Dante, watch the precise, terrifying way he claims his property. He did not ask for her trembling hand. He seized it. From his pocket, he produced an absurdly heavy, emerald-cut diamond that caught the light like a fractured mirror. In the dark reality of control, extravagant gifts are never tokens of affection. They are beautiful, crushing shackles. He slid the freezing metal onto her finger, physically yanking her into his personal space to cement his absolute dominance. Never forget this simple, unbreakable rule of life. Genuine love will never ever begin by demanding your total submission. He pulled her against his chest, her heart hammering against his ribs. "Rule number 1, he whispered into her ear. The camera tightens on her terrified face as he outlines the invisible prison. They were never to be seen apart in public, he commanded, quickly adding rule number 2. She was never to question his absolute authority. He brushed his cold lips against her ear, methodically stripping away the last remnants of her identity. She was no longer Evelyn Vance, the struggling waitress. She was now Evelyn Moretti, and that made her a prime, bleeding target in the underworld. By warning her that fleeing would result in a brutal death at the hands of his rivals, he perfectly positioned himself as both her ruthless captor and her only savior. Do not let anyone convince you that a locked cage is the only safe place to survive. "Welcome to the family," he murmured. Suddenly, the steel elevator chimed. "Dante, we have a problem." The heavy doors fly open, and a frantic man in a blood-soaked shirt bursts into the dimly lit room, babbling about a rival strike on the Bronx warehouse. The camera pushes in on Dante. His physical control is utterly terrifying. Not a single muscle twitches. His expression remains carved from marble. Yet the room's atmosphere instantly turns to ice. Instead of acknowledging the bleeding messenger, Dante's dark eyes stay obsessively fixed on Evelyn. With agonizing calmness, he summons Silas, his driver. Observe his clinical detachment as he orders his new bride-to-be locked in the master suite under heavy guard, offering zero comfort for her rising panic. You and I must remember a simple truth here. A man's true nature is never found in peace, but in the freezing clarity of violent chaos. Only then does he finally release her trembling hand. Dante gazes out the high windows, viewing the city below as a doomed chessboard. "The war I told you about," he whispers, adjusting his cuffs with terrifying calm. "It just started." The drive to the estate becomes a masterclass in sensory deprivation. Silas steers the armored vehicle through the black night in suffocating silence. In the back seat, the camera lingers on Evelyn's trembling fingers as she desperately twists the heavy diamond ring digging into her skin. She tries to rationalize this nightmare, convincing herself that trading her freedom for her brother's life was noble. Yet the tragedy of sacrifice teaches us a harsh lesson. We willingly step into the fire to save another, only to realize too late the true, devastating cost. As her adrenaline finally fades, a suffocating, freezing fog of dread settles deep in her bones. As the heavy vehicle pushes north into the shrouded hills of the Hudson Valley, the isolation turns absolute, fade into a pitch-black wilderness. They arrive at massive wrought iron gate, 20 feet high and crowned with lethal spikes. Following a cold biometric scan, the iron groans open like the jaws of a beast. "Where are we?" Evelyn whispers, her fragile voice swallowed by the cavernous car. Silas merely grunts that it is the fortress. Emerging from the freezing fog, a sprawling gray stone mansion rises like a Gothic cathedral, stripped entirely of mercy. The architecture is a weapon meant to crush the spirit. There is a deep lesson in this brutal design. The thicker the walls a man builds to keep the world out, the more terrified he is of losing control within. This is no home, it is merely a beautiful tomb for the living. You and I must look closely at the bleak environment pulling her in. Despite the grand turrets, the estate radiates zero warmth. Blinding floodlights slash through the fog, casting shadows of armed guards marching with assault rifles, their German shepherds pulling against tight leashes. Silas barks at her to move inside, stating the boss refuses to leave her exposed, a terrifying display of resource guarding. As Evelyn steps out, the freezing night air physically burns her lungs. Waiting by the oak doors is an older woman, her eyes coldly processing the captive like inventory. This brings us a tragic truth. The most dangerous prison in our world are often perfectly disguised as beautiful palaces. This sprawling fortress is designed to crush a soul's resistance long before they enter. Martha, the housekeeper, stands as the grim warden of this dark facility. Dressed in a severe black gown, she coldly declares that Dante demands his bride be taken directly to the master's suite. Evelyn stammers, begging for a guest room, desperately clinging to the fading illusion of normal boundaries. From the top of the sweeping staircase, Martha looks down with a chilling blend of pity and iron sternness. "There are no guests here," she states flatly. "You sleep where he sleeps. That is the rule." Evelyn's heart hammers frantically against her ribs as the crushing reality of her absolute subjugation takes hold. Walking past ancient oil paintings of violent predatory men, a heavy life lesson echoes. When you agree to play a role in a monster's story, you forfeit the right to write your own ending. She is completely trapped in his web. Today, you and I will witness this tragic psychological descent together. The nightmare crystallizes when Martha escorts Evelyn through massive oak doors. The warden delivers instructions with cold precision. Remain inside. Food will be brought. And stepping out triggers a biometric lockdown. Evelyn breathes a trembling sigh as the deadbolt slides into place with a deafening mechanical click. She is now a prisoner. The camera pans as she surveys her beautiful cage, where every detail is engineered for pure intimidation. A stone hearth casts violent shadows across the mahogany furniture and pitch-black silk sheets. This teaches us a bitter lesson. The darkest cells in life are often woven from luxury, built solely to enforce our absolute, heart-wrenching vulnerability. The scents in the grand suite are overwhelming: sharp cedarwood, cold rain, and the heavy aroma of expensive tobacco. This perfectly cements Dante's invisible dominance over her senses. Pressing her hand against the freezing window, Evelyn watches armed guards patrolling the misty perimeter. She finally understands her role in this tragedy: a hostage waiting in the dark for the predator. She leaves the silver tray of food untouched, a quiet, desperate rebellion of the soul. Pulling her knees tightly to her chest, she waits. A powerful life lesson emerges here. True powerlessness is measured in the silent hours spent waiting for the inevitable. At exactly 2 in the morning, the heavy deadbolt disengages. Dante enters the room, his immaculate facade violently stripped away, radiating pure, dangerous energy. Every inch of Dante's frame screams of a brutal war. His dark sleeves are rolled, his tie loose, his hair plastered with rain and sweat. Yet the eye is drawn to the crimson horror. A rapidly expanding bloodstain saturates the crude bandage wrapped around his forearm, matching his split, bruised knuckles. He pauses in the doorway, chest heaving, vibrating with the jagged electricity of a wolf fresh off a kill. "You are awake," he rasps, his voice strained. "You are bleeding," Evelyn whispers, her body moving involuntarily toward him. This is a beautifully tragic pivot. Her ingrained trauma of caring for her sick brother overrides all logic. We learn a hard life lesson here. During moments of terrifying stress, our hearts often betray us, defaulting to the familiar caregiving habits that ultimately seal our fate. "It is nothing," Dante growls, attempting to bypass her toward the washroom. Evelyn's reaction is sharp. That is not a scratch. It is soaking through the bandage. He freezes, his dark pupils blown wide with the toxic adrenaline of recent violence. "And what do you care?" he snarls, his deep paranoia bleeding out. "You got what you wanted. Leo is safe. Go to sleep." As the harsh words leave his lips, his equilibrium fails and his massive frame sways. Operating on pure instinct, Evelyn crosses the floor and grips his uninjured arm. The ruthless boss flinches, his muscles locking like coiled steel beneath her delicate fingers, yet he permits the contact. "Sit down," she commands. A beautiful life lesson appears. Compassion is a strange armor. When we instinctively step forward to heal the broken, we temporarily forget our own fear. Let's pause here, you and I, and look at this standoff. I have changed my brother's dressings for 2 years. "I know how to handle a wound," she says softly. "Sit." Dante scrutinizes her, searching for betrayal. Finding none, he slowly sinks onto the edge of the mattress, masking a grimace. Evelyn retrieves a medical kit, stepping into a highly vulnerable space by kneeling directly between his knees. "This will sting," she murmurs, peeling back the bloody gauze to expose a jagged blade wound. As she applies the burning antiseptic, Dante does not flinch or make a single sound. Instead, his dark, obsessive gaze locks entirely onto her pale face. We are reminded of a profound lesson. The deepest wounds a man carries are rarely the physical ones that bleed, but the invisible scars hidden behind his cold stare. Like a predator studying a fragile bird, Dante tracks every micro-expression on her face, the gentle furrow of her brow, the calm efficiency of her hands. "Why are you doing this?" he asks. His aggressive paranoia has vanished, replaced by a dark sociopathic fascination. "Most people would let me bleed out." Evelyn keeps her eyes lowered, remaining clinically detached. "I am not most people, and I do not like blood on the silk sheets." This dry remark pulls a short, abrupt laugh from the kingpin, a shocking crack in his monstrous armor. "There," she whispers, finalizing the temporary dressing. But as she attempts to retreat, his hand shoots forward with blinding speed, locking around her wrist like a steel vice. We learn a tragic life lesson here. Offering a moment of gentle kindness to a beast never tames him. It only makes him hunger for you more. You and I can feel the air empty from the room. Her boundaries are instantly shattered, crushed beneath the heavy weight of his dominance. With one swift motion, he pulls her flush against his chest, trapping her so tightly she feels the violent heat of his skin. "You are a strange creature," he murmurs, his thumb pressing against her racing pulse, tracking her terror. "You fear me, yet you heal my wounds." Her breath catches in her throat. "I am just fulfilling my contract," she whispers desperately. Dante's dark eyes drop to her trembling lips, a cruel, calculated move to induce deep confusion. His voice falls to a lethal whisper. "Do you know why you are locked in here tonight?" A chilling life lesson emerges. The terrifying monsters we try to escape are sometimes the only walls standing between us and a much darker evil. "Because there is a traitor," Dante whispers. "Someone in my circle gave them the coordinates." A violent shiver rips through Evelyn's fragile frame. Dante leans in, his shadow swallowing her. "I cannot trust my guards or my captains," he says, rising to his towering height. "The only person here I know is clean is you." She looks up, bewildered. Then he delivers the killing blow. "Because you despise my world, and because I control the only thing you love, your brother." He reaches out and snaps off the lamp. The room plunges into a suffocating dark, lit only by the dying red embers of the fireplace. It shows us a terrifying reality we all must learn. The absolute strongest cages in this world are never made of iron bars, but of the desperate love we hold for our own family. "Get in the bed," he orders. Panic flashes across Evelyn's face. She tries to hide behind their contract, but he cuts her off. "The contract says you follow my orders." He strips off his ruined shirt, the dim light catching a chest carved with jagged scars. "I need sleep," he mutters. "If an assassin comes, I must know exactly where you are." He sinks onto the mattress, sliding a gun under his pillow with chilling ease. He points to the empty space. "I won't hurt you," he sighs, sounding drained. "But you will sleep here as my alibi." Evelyn stands completely frozen, trapped in his heavy gravity. It is a bitter reality we all face eventually. Sometimes sheer survival forces us to surrender our control to the exact storm we are trying so desperately to outrun. Let's look at this frame together. We are watching a tragedy unfold, echoing the dark history of the kingpin Vittorio and his captive Luca. Dante operates on that same twisted wavelength. The camera lingers on Evelyn as she realizes the true danger is breathing heavily right next to her spine. She lies rigid on the mattress edge, her tense body language mirroring a soul inching toward Stockholm Syndrome. "Good night," the monster whispers. She makes no sound. What she doesn't know is that out in the silent hallway, a shadow is already lingering by their door. The traitor is inside. Dante has started a lethal chess match, and Evelyn is the helpless bait. It serves as a grim reminder in life. The absolute most dangerous betrayals always happen right under our own roofs. You and I are at the edge of this narrative, waiting to see what breaks first. The human mind is fragile when locked in a room with terror, and Evelyn is teetering on emotional collapse. Will she hold on to her soul, or will this trauma bond erase her survival instincts? If you are captivated by this story, please like and subscribe so we can keep unraveling the tragedy. We are about to witness the next phase of Dante's manipulation. The shadows are shifting, the traitor is moving, and the impending crash will be devastating. Tell me in the comments, do you think this monster is protecting her, Or is she just a weapon? It leaves us with a haunting thought for our own lives. Sometimes the people who promise to keep us safe are exactly who we need saving from the most.